Greetings all, Ferrariman 601 here. Let me be clear from the outset. I don't want to make this video. So then why are you making it? Well, part of being involved in covering the world of motorsports means that you have to stay on top of current trends. And that is exactly what I am doing here. I'm not the first to do this, and I certainly won't be the last to do this. However, the big elephant in the room for 2018 is the introduction of cockpit head protection, namely halo. And if you look closely at this car, you can see just maybe a little hint of a halo installed on it. Of course, this is the famous Halo mod that's been up on Race Department for a little while now, and a lot of other people have already run it. However, I have finally gotten around to running with this thing, and I have actually yet to turn a lap with the Halo. This is, of course, the Ferrari SF70H. I have reskinned it in pure gray here with no sponsors on it, no nothing, because, well, I honestly don't want to defile the wonderful appearance of the SF70H with this device. However, here it is. It's installed on the car, and we're going to do some running with it today just to show you how your sight lines change a little bit. We are at Spa, and Spa is one of the circuits that I've been thinking about a lot in terms of, the drivers really do need to be able to see where they're going at this place because there's a lot of elevation change. There are quite a few blind corners that are taken at very high speed, and if Halo is going to have any sort of impact on driver visibility and overall drivability of a circuit, Spa is going to be one of the places where it's really going to show. Also, we're not going to be able to go to Spa until the end of summer, so we have quite a long time before we actually get to see the Formula One drivers with Halo taking on Spa. So this is the closest we're going to get for the foreseeable future anyway. In the cockpit of the SF70H here, modified with the Halo, you can see quite clearly where the Halo is and just how it might interfere with our sight lines. Looking around the car here, it doesn't look that bad, quite honestly, from a visual standpoint. I can see very clearly out in front, I can see off to the sides, I can see the mirrors just fine, and of course it doesn't interfere at all with viewing the cockpit instrumentation. But where we may well notice some hindrance from Halo is going to be in those elevation changes going up through Eau Rouge and Rédillon, perhaps coming down the hill toward Pouhon, perhaps coming back up the hill at the end of the lap after we've gone through Stavelot. So we're definitely going to figure out all of that. But this is the view that we get from the cockpit with Halo. Now, of course, Halo has been introduced basically in reaction to accidents that unfortunately have claimed the lives of drivers like Henry Surtees in Formula 2, and then on the IndyCar side of the world, Dan Wheldon and Justin Wilson. It's debatable whether or not Halo would have had any effect whatsoever in those accidents. I think it's pretty clear that it probably would have helped Henry Surtees, but in the cases of Dan Wheldon or Justin Wilson in IndyCar, certainly the jury is out. On the Formula One side of the world, Felipe Massa with a very serious accident in 2009, being hit in the head by a spring from another car. Really, it's uncertain whether or not Halo would have made any difference there. And of course, in 2014, the fatal accident of Jules Bianchi, it's pretty clear that Halo would have done absolutely nothing to be helpful in that case. Such were the forces involved with Bianchi running into the back of that tractor. However, Halo is what we have. Its principal design requirement was to be able to deflect a wheel and tire assembly flying through the air, hitting the Halo at a relative speed of about 225 kilometers per hour, or around 130 or so miles per hour. That's the design requirement. Halo in testing has proven to be able to deflect a wheel and tire assembly in that situation, therefore it is on the cars. But what is it like to drive? We've got to find that out. In order to do that, we've got to put some fuel in this car. And we'll go out and we'll just do some laps here and see if we can figure anything out in terms of what's different, if anything is different. I have not driven the Halo yet, so these are my first laps with a Halo-equipped car. The SF70H, no modifications other than the Halo. We'll see how it goes, and I'll try to just give you a play-by-play in terms of what I think. Out of the pit lane here, speed limiter is deactivated. First couple laps probably going to be quite slow. Now here is where, yeah, coming into Eau Rouge there, just for clarification's sake, Eau Rouge is the little left-hand kink right before you get up the hill. The other part of the corner that goes up the hill toward the right and then off to the left again, that is Rédillon. I couldn't really see up into Rédillon when I was in Eau Rouge. Through Les Combes now, just looking apex to apex. You can still see pretty much everything there. Down the hill, through the long right-hander at speed. This is Understeer City. Corner with no name and down the hill now. So far, I'm having no trouble hitting my marks. Into the Fagnes chicane. Exit of Fagnes over the curbs. Coming down to rejoin the original circuit. Stabilo. Coming back up onto the hill. Approaching Blanchimont. What's this going to be like? No real problems. Coming up into the bus stop. And on to start finish. That's our first lap. On start finish. Into La Source. And coming down the hill again, back toward the Eau Rouge Rédillon complex. Let's see, I cannot see cannot see the top of Rédillon as I'm turning into Eau Rouge. That's interesting. Coming down Kemmel now to 315, coming up to 320. The entrance curbs, can't see them if you look ahead. You've really got to look off to the side around that center strut. Can't see my turn-in point if I look straight ahead. Not at all. Up to Blanchimont. Back up toward start finish once again. Coming down start finish, basically I know that my braking point is behind the center strut right now. And then we look off to the sides to try and orient ourselves. You can't look straight ahead in a lot of cases anymore. Kemmel DRS open. Still haven't activated the hybrid systems. They're just in pure regen mode at this point. Just trying to get a sense of where my eyes have to be. Obviously, your eyes are basically never straight ahead anymore. Everything is off to the side now. You have to look farther up the track right now than you do without the halo, just because of that center strut. I've already picked my turn-in point for Fagnes. Challenging part is in double element corners where you either have a change of direction or you have multiple apices to hit, I'd imagine. Corners that don't have a constant radius throughout, so that's going to be corners like turn 1 at Suzuka, for example, 130R at Suzuka, Spoon at Suzuka, where you've got a change in radius all the time. Turn 1 at the Hungaroring might be a little bit of a challenge. Most interesting thing of all, though, with this Halo is how's Monaco going to work? There are quite a few places in Monaco where you're pointing the nose of the car at the extreme edge of the barrier before you approach a corner, because you know that's where the road goes, but you can't necessarily see the road at that particular moment. And with the nose pointed just perpendicular to a barrier, if you look straight off the front of the monocoque, you see that big central stay. In a short track like Monaco, with tight corners, you don't have a lot of breathing room between one corner and the next. What I'm describing me having to do right now, with having to look very far out ahead and plan my turn-in point well before I've actually reached that point. Monaco is going to be very much a trial of the driver just having memorized the circuit. Of course, that's not to say what's going to happen with traffic. Working on our 4th lap. Confidence is building a little bit. And I know this circuit extremely well, and I know this car extremely well. Just getting used to the sight lines, really. Everything is happening at an angle now. Nothing is straight in terms of where your eyes are going. A lot of where your eyes start to travel is the same. I mean, you tend to shift your gaze from apex to apex anyway. Just right here, this is annoying because you can't look straight ahead at your braking point. Right into La Source there, you cannot look straight ahead at your braking point, and it means that you've got to find landmarks on the side of the track rather than directly out in front of you in order to sight your braking point properly, and that's a bit of an adaptation. Down Kemmel as well, obviously you can't see straight out in front of you. Right now I have no idea where those entrance curbs are into Les Caux. I'm just looking off to the side waiting for them. There they are, braking. Through here it's okay because you're looking out to the right, now looking out to the left. Looking right, already looked around the apex. Now already picked up the next corner, braking. Now I'm already looking for the entrance curbs at Pouhon because straight on I can't see them. There they are. Brakes, looking for the exit. There's the exit, boom. Entrance curbs here, turning in. Apex, looking for the second apex. Looking for the exit curbs over Blind Crest, there we go. We looked around the corner, there's the exit curbs up there, boom. Lap times are coming down. Already looking around the right-hand bend, looking up toward the braking zone for bus stop. Overshot it a little bit, that's okay. The BRS line, turn on the MGU. Down the hill, I've already looked up over the top of Radillon because now I can't see it anymore. Brakes. Hybrid system coming in really does help with the straight line speed. Really helps with speed all around. We're up 1 3/4 seconds over our previous best. little wide, that's okay. Manual deploy now. Split time just tumbling. Brakes. Apex 1, there's Apex 2. Hit Apex 2 on the power. DRS. 146.71. It's not too bad. That's a competitive time. So has the adaptation been made already? Quite possibly. It's just you've got to retrain your eyes in terms of where to look at what time. You're looking in all the same places. So all the landmarks that you have figured out here for Spa, for the most part. 2 places where they don't apply anymore. Here into Les Combes at the end of the Kemmel Strait and at La Source. You're looking off to the side a whole lot more than perhaps you normally do. Otherwise, you can still basically drive it the same way. You've just got to get used to the ability to try and delete that central pillar as much as possible from your field of view. The brain is a very suggestible thing, in that if you do put something in your field of view for long enough, the brain will learn to ignore it. I don't know if that's going to happen with that central strut of Halo or not, but I can understand maybe a little bit of how it could. What that central strut is also apt to do, though, it's apt to split your eyes. What I mean by that is, obviously we have 2 eyes, and they give your brain 2 distinct images, and your brain, through its psychological processes, is able to stitch those images together into a single coherent image, and that's what we see. But your eyes are giving your brain 2 distinct images. And if you really want to talk about the optical quality of the human eye, it's actually pretty terrible. It's alarmingly terrible. But your brain's able to compensate for it. What that central stay in Halo does, however, is it forces your eyes basically to go into monocular mode, where each eye is giving your brain a separate image, and your brain is trying to process those images as separate images, and it can lead to a little bit of confusion in the beginning. I'd imagine this would be definitely true in reality. Forces your eyes kind of to work independently of each other. Drivers, of course, will be able to adjust to that, but from my vantage point here, it's an adjustment. It really is. It really, truly is. Basically, first reactions from running with Halo for the first time, it's obviously doable. I'm not going to lie there, it's doable. The biggest thing, though, is just how that center stay comes down, and it completely blocks your vision directly straight ahead. And at corners that are approached at, they're basically 90-degree corners, and then you've got to find your braking point, and you've got to find your turn-in point. Obviously, we're all used to driving without that obstruction, really, so if that's how you rely on finding your landmarks for your braking points or your turn-in points, you've got to rethink that. I've got to rethink. I have to think Les Combes. I have to rethink La Source as well on this circuit. And really, when we start to talk about shorter circuits with more blind corners, I'm thinking of Monaco, and I'm thinking of places like Baku and Singapore as well. That's really going to be an adjustment for these drivers. And obviously, they've all proven themselves to be very adaptable people, and I'm sure that they will figure it out, probably much more quickly than I'll be able to figure out, or any of us simmers will be able to figure it out. But it's an adjustment. It really is an adjustment, visually from the cockpit. Visually, of course, from external sides, well, there it is. You see much more Halo than you see driver's helmet these days, and, well, I guess the jury will be out in terms of what that really looks like on television. We'll see some hot laps here from external as well as TCAM onboard views, just to give you a sense of what that looks like. And then we will return with a possible alternative. Welcome back to Spa. Now that you've had the opportunity to see those hot laps from external and onboard shots, the biggest thing that jumps into my mind is just how pervasive that halo structure is from the onboard camera. Of course, most of the onboard shots that we see are still from that T-cam view. It's been that way really since the mid-90s, and you can't really see all that much of the car anymore. You see halo, and that's about it. Sure, you can see the driver, you can see into the cockpit, steering wheel, and all that, but you can't really see the front end of the car very well. You can't see the front suspension at all. It's really a pervasive thing, and I can assure you that that's not going to make for good television. Unfortunately, I think we may see a reduction in the number of onboard cameras that we see this year simply because you can't get a good angle anymore. Even if you try to run the side view from the side of the snorkel, like you see the pod there mounted on the side of the car, I'm not entirely sure what you're going to be able to see. You're going to be looking straight down the center line of that cross member on the halo. So in terms of being able to see the track, it's not going to be that good, really. Anyway, we're back at Spa, we're back with the 70H, and we have an alternative solution installed on the car now. This, as you can see, is the Aeroscreen. This is another version of cockpit head protection that was trialed in 2016 and 2017. Ferrari basically vetoed it because Sebastian Vettel claimed that he got motion sickness when he drove with it. I'm not entirely sure how true that is. On the other side of the pond, IndyCar have been testing something very similar to this with Scott Dixon over there in Phoenix, and it seems like it went pretty well. Scott Dixon's only real complaint about it was that it gets a bit hot in the cockpit. They're going to have to figure out how to get some more air in there to cool the driver, but he didn't report any real problems with visibility, anything like that, no distortion, no glare. So IndyCar apparently is making some progress with a concept like this. Formula One apparently has shelved it for the time being. If we go in the cockpit here, you can see that our sight lines have been restored. We don't have any pervasive central element here. We don't have anything that's blocking our field of view above or below. You can just see a line there where that windscreen cuts off, and then you're back to open sky again. So just preliminarily sitting here in the cockpit, I don't think I'm really going to have to adjust anything at all in terms of where I'm looking. As with the Halo before, I have not turned a lap with the Aero screen either, so this is also a first for me. Back to the pits, we're going to put some fuel in the car again, exactly the same setup that we just ran. 25 liters of fuel on board. And now with the car alive, we'll be able to get a sense of what the Aero screen is like, and hopefully we'll be able to draw some conclusions in comparison between this and the Halo concept that we just trialed. Coming out of the pit lane. That sight line through Eau Rouge and Raidillon. Unobstructed. Unobstructed. I can look everywhere that I would normally look. And so far, so good. Looking straight out in front once again. I can see now where my braking point has to be exactly. Turning in to Les Combes. Out of Les Combes to the exit. There it is. The apex, there's the exit. Looking for our turn-in point for Pouhon, here it is. No mysteries there. Defagné. There's our second apex. There's our exit. Down towards Stabilo. Entrance, apex, exit. Do that all day long, no problem. Coming back uphill, here's Blanchiment. Exit, no issues. Braking for the bus stop. No problems whatsoever. You probably have been able to pick up a little bit of glare and a little bit of reflections coming across this Aero screen. That is a little bit annoying, I will say. Seeing reflections of the curbs and other objects on the side of the racetrack. You just pop into your field of view and They are a little distracting. Not going to lie, they are a little distracting, but at least they're not encumbering my vision at all. I can look through that, no problem. I can't look through the center stay of that halo. That's just there, and there's not a thing I can do about it. This, though, my eyes are dancing from apex to exit, and then from apex to exit again. I can pick up my braking points just as I normally would. No issues there. I do imagine that the cockpit would be getting pretty hot. There is no airflow into the cockpit, at least not to the extent that there was without any sort of device in the front of it, but visually speaking, it's pretty much normal. You just got to deal with those reflections, as you can see, coming in. And of course, at different times of day with the sun at different altitudes, that may or may not get worse. It's a little difficult to tell. Judging from what Scott Dixon said, though, doesn't really appear to be that much of an issue, and if he's running at high speed on an oval, well then, I guess that's all right. The question does come to mind, though, does this have the structural integrity of the halo, relatively speaking, in terms of being able to deflect that wheel and tire assembly at 225 or so? Maybe, maybe not. IndyCar seemed to be pretty pleased with the design constraints of the Aeroscreen, at least in testing. Of course, there are no plans at the moment to introduce it into races, but we could see it by the end of 2018. Again, time will tell. But in Formula One right now, there are no plans to bring something like this in. Visually speaking, though, this feels 100% normal. No real adaptations going on with my sight lines or where I'm having to direct my eyes, either consciously or otherwise. This is pretty normal. The only thing that you do notice are those reflections, those optical reflections as well as the reflections of light. But so far, this really doesn't feel like much of a change. And of course, this is what Formula One is not going to do. You can see everything that I normally would be able to see. Not much of an adaptation at all. If anything, you notice the reflections a little bit more when you look off to the side, as you're apt to do in a lot of situations. Whenever you turn into a corner, really, you're not looking straight ahead. You're looking toward the apex, so you're looking out the side of the car at around 40, 50 degrees. But here's the big test. Eau Rouge and Raidillon can see the entire corner the whole time. No mysteries there. If I can be completely honest, the one situation that I'm very concerned about with regard to Halo is what happens if you're at a place like Spa and there is a car that is stopped on top of Raidillon, which is normally blind anyway. But if a driver can't pick that out from a distance, and let's say the car hasn't spun yet or stopped yet from that distance relative to the other driver, and then the car has stopped on the racing line in Raidillon, is the driver approaching going to have any opportunity to see that? I don't know. And of course we see big accidents at the top of Raidillon somewhat frequently, and considering it's taken flat out, the speed differential would be quite high relative between a stopped car and one that's approaching the corner. The driver can't see it. He can't take evasive action, number one, and number two, he can't brace for impact, number two. So a T-bone type accident occurring because the approaching driver can't see the hazard, that's something that I have been thinking about. And of course, that's something that's never been tested. Now we're talking about the Aeroscreen here, and so far I really haven't said any negatives about it. The only negatives that I can think of, cockpit cooling, number one, and we have some data to go off of there with Scott Dixon testing a similar concept in IndyCar. The other thing that comes to mind is pretty obvious. What happens in the rain? How do you keep this thing clear? Also, how do you keep this thing clear of debris, bugs, dirt, that kind of thing? Just stuff that gets thrown up in the general direction of these cars as they're following nose to tail. Bits of rolled up rubber from the tires of the car in front or the track surface. They could still be quite hot and they'd be sticky. They may adhere themselves to the surface of the Aeroscreen. How do you keep this clear? Is there some sort of non-stick coating that you could apply to this that won't impact the overall transparency and glare qualities of something like this? Maybe, maybe not. Is there some sort of a washer system that you might be able to install on something like this? Basically some sort of squirt bottle, to put it bluntly, like you'd get on a road car, the windscreen washers there. I don't know, and as silly an idea as that might sound, it may be something that's worth investigating if Formula One or IndyCar wants to go in a direction like this. Do you have tear-offs on this like you have on the helmet visors? Maybe. There'd be no way for a driver to pull one of those off as he's going along. That would have to be done in a pit stop, much like you see in closed cockpit racing, in more conventional-looking cars, GT, LMP1, things like that, where they have tear-offs on the windscreen, and the pit crews just pull them off in the pit stop. That's something that might be worth consideration. But then if you go in that route, what do you do in the rain? Because drivers often complain about water getting between the tear-off elements on their helmets. Water gets in between the tear-off elements on an Aeroscreen, well then, you really can't see. However, I'm having a whole lot better a time talking to you on this run with the Aeroscreen than I was with the Halos, so that's probably indicative of the basically the amount that I'm not having to concentrate in terms of just trying to find my sight lines. Everything is normal. This is what I'm used to. Basically 95%. So it's not much of an adaptation at all. You got to deal with the reflections, as I said, and the bezel, basically the border between where the Aeroscreen and the cockpit meet up. There is that black line there, which does impinge in your general field of view a little bit. But that's really not too bad, and something like that may be more dependent on the shape of the monocoque of an individual car, so that may not even be a universal thing. It's far less intrusive than the binnacle where the shift light is on the Williams FW19, for example. That thing is literally right smack in front of you. That's almost as intrusive as the central stay on the Halo. And of course, in more recent times, Red Bull, for example, running those big pods over the dampers on the front suspension, they were also in your field of view, and you did have to sort of adjust your sight lines to look around them. That wasn't that big of a deal, though, once you got used to it. So something like this with that little bezel around the bottom edge of the Aeroscreen, not really a problem. The other thing you'll notice is that my mirrors are in front of the Aeroscreen. So the Aeroscreen is coming down in between where our eyes are and where the mirrors are. That may impact rear visibility a little bit, depending on whether or not there's any sort of water or debris or bug splatter or anything on the Aeroscreen, but probably not that big of a deal. And if I could go out on a limb here, and obviously we'll show you this in a couple of minutes, but the onboard camera shots from that T-cam, this is going to be far less intrusive than the Halo. You're going to be able to see the front end of the car again, I would imagine. You're going to be able to see the suspension, and of course, you're already going to have a good view into the cockpit, so you'll be able to see the steering wheel and the driver's hands and all of that. So, not really concerned from the television side of the world in terms of having nice shots to look at. This comes down to, can you mitigate glare, can you mitigate reflections, and can you maintain the structural strength of something like this aerodynamically as well as from impact resistance. Again, the criterion that the FIA have established is it must be able to deflect wheel and tire assembly at 225 kilometers an hour. If this can do that, then I don't understand why it would not be considered a suitable alternative. Also, aerodynamically, I'd imagine this has got to be better than the Halo. It's a continuous surface presented to the airstream rather than that open skeleton sort of structure. Engineers can probably manipulate a symmetrical flow a whole lot more easily than they can an asymmetrical one, like you get off of the Halo. Back into the pit lane here. Do another one of our spin turns. Well, just from a cockpit point of view, the Aeroscreen is a whole lot more tenable an idea than the Halo. The Halo, yeah, obviously it's drivable, and we demonstrated that, but the Aeroscreen requires pretty much no adaptation whatsoever. The Halo, you can't look directly in front of you, which means that your eyes are more so shifted laterally, trying to look at what's around the car rather than what's in front of it. With the Aeroscreen, you can see everywhere at any time, so if you tend to look more straight ahead, you can still look straight ahead. If you tend to look more laterally, you can still look more laterally. So the Aeroscreen, from a driving perspective, is the better idea, in my opinion. And of course, we'll find out in a few moments from the onboard hot laps whether or not it looks better for a TV vantage point as well as externally from a TV vantage point. But so far, the Aeroscreen, from a driving perspective, seems to be the better alternative. Now, can it do its jobs in terms of safety? Can it deflect that wheel tire assembly? Maybe it'd be a little bit more difficult to get the Aeroscreen to do that because it has far fewer structural elements to play with, and it's all basically hinging on the rigidity and resilience of that plexiglass screen, the transparent element of the Aeroscreen, as to whether or not it can deflect debris. But from where I'm sitting from a driving perspective, this is the way to go. Now, of course, there are still some further challenges in addition to structural strength. You've got to be able to deal with fogging, misting, water deflection, debris deflection in terms of gravel, sand, rolled up rubber, bug splatter, things like that. I think you could deal with that problem with tear-offs or things of that nature, but then again, if it's raining and you get water between the tear-offs, the wind's not going to be able to get underneath there and pull that water away. So what happens? Also, just a little thing that popped into my head, if it is raining, and say that the visibility isn't a problem, where's the water going to go once it gets blown off of the airstream? Is it just going to be pushed up over the top of the car? Is it going to drip into the cockpit? Are there issues like that? I don't know. Nobody's really tested that. That's somewhat less of a concern in IndyCar because when they're really running at high speeds, they're running on ovals, and they don't run in the rain on ovals for obvious reasons of sanity. But they do run in the rain on road courses. It's just that on most road courses, they're not getting to ridiculously high speeds. They're certainly not getting nearly as fast as they do on the super speedways. So maybe for IndyCar, that's not much of a concern. But for Formula One, it is a concern. What do you do with the water? So that's something that would still need to be hashed out. But the Aeroscreen is also an alternative, and I think in a lot of respects, it's a more viable one than the Halo because it's going to be easier for the drivers to adapt to. And in addition to that, just because of that ease of adaptability, the drivers aren't going to be liable to become crossed up, if you will, in terms of they revert to old habits when they're in high stress situations, running in traffic, things like that, or trying to avoid an accident. I can understand the possibility that a driver in a high stress situation running with Halo, he might panic a little bit and he might revert to old habits that he's just had ingrained in himself from running years and years and years in open cockpit cars with no visual obstructions really. So do we get a situation where a driver is momentarily blinded by the halo, so to speak, and that causes an accident? Maybe, maybe not. Of course, that's not talking about driver extrication. Yes, the Halo's been tested for that, and obviously the FIA are reasonably satisfied with all of that, but they've increased the driver extrication time. That doesn't sound good to me. In a high-stress situation, let's say a car's on fire and the driver needs to be able to get out with the halo attached, is he again going to revert to old habits and just try to get out of the car as he normally would? With the halo, the driver has to pull himself out of the car on the halo. And if he's panicked, he may not immediately think to do that. And that's going to cost time in a situation where he really needs to get out. And again, we hope that we don't see something like that. But if we do, I honestly just hope that the drivers are able to remember the protocol and get out of the car. In terms of marshals being able to get drivers out, can Halo be cut away quickly enough? We'll find out. Hopefully it can be, but if it cannot be, I shudder to think of the potential consequences. But anyway, that's what we've got here. Halo and Aeroscreen. I like the Aeroscreen a whole lot better than I like the Halo, but I don't know. You can leave me your comments, your thoughts, and your suggestions on what perhaps the FIA could do with regard to Formula One, and perhaps what IndyCar could do as they continue to explore similar concepts to this. Again, IndyCar is going in the direction of the Aeroscreen, it appears, and quite obviously, Formula One have decided to bring in Halo for 2018. So we've got two takes on a same sort of solution to the same sort of problem, and we'll see what transpires here. In terms of the development of the 2018 season, well, obviously everyone's going to run Halo in Formula One, and we'll see if the drivers are going to go along with it. Max Verstappen has already come out saying that he's not at all looking forward to running with the ugly Halo, his words. We'll see if other drivers are feeling similarly. I know that Nico Hulkenberg is also a big critic of the Halo, and if enough drivers get out there and say we don't like this thing, perhaps the FIA may be inclined to do something about it, or maybe not. That all remains to be seen, of course, once we get to the first race in Australia in the middle of March. However, though, I will leave you with a view of hot laps with the Aero screen from external as well as onboard shots, and we can start to hash it out in the comments below in terms of what we see here. This is my take on it now, having driven with both solutions. I can tell you I like the Aero screen better. The Halo is obviously drivable. It's just that you've got to really adapt your sightlines a bit more with Halo than you do with the Aero screen. The Aero screen, really the only downside are the reflections visually. And then, of course, in the real world, driver cooling is a little bit of a concern. Halo doesn't have any reflection problem or any driver cooling problem because it is still largely open. But you got that big central stay on Halo, which really does affect the way that you look at the world. However, that's all for me. Stand by for hot laps with the Aero screen, and then let's have a discussion in the comments. Ferrariman 601 saying thank you very much for watching, and we will see you soon.